It's February the 22nd, 2018. And for those of you who sent me messages about my near disaster, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. I feel better now, somewhat better. Knock on, knock on wood. It's not easy going through an experience like that. And I haven't felt good the past couple of days. I've been frightened. Uh, I wasn't hit exactly, but I was shaken up so badly that the shock just had a very bad effect on me. In any case, I appreciate the support. Now, in terms of the video that I made a couple of days ago about the scene in publishing and in Canadian publishing, I made the point first of all that there tends to be, in my opinion anyway, there tends to be a lack of fiction that is sort of viscerally convincing. And I thought about that a little bit more. I do hope that there's going to be a bit of a discussion about this whole topic because, in my mind, it kind of jigsaws with the whole question of the role of how literature has evolved in the 21st century. This is a complicated topic, and I can't possibly go over all sort of the aspects of it in just a couple of minutes. But two things that I'd like to focus on, first of all, are the role of the MFA programs and the way they play a role in sort of developing careers, sometimes quite quickly, when people make the right connections and when they're lucky and so forth. Now, I don't want to dwell too strongly on the issue of making connections through an MFA program in a negative way because I realize there are just talented people who go to these programs and their talent is recognized and they get letters of reference from professors who are acting properly and make connections with publishing people or with agents and so forth, and that's fine. But I do also want to emphasize that this is becoming a sort of the cultural equivalent in some ways of a bit of a whisper network. In other words, it used to be that you sent your manuscripts to publishers, and there are a lot of people, older people, who believe that the industry still functions that way. Well, it doesn't really so much, and we need to sort of clarify whether the MFA programs are the primary or one of the primary ways of building a career as a writer. That's point number one. And point number two is there are situations, not just with people like Steven Galloway and so forth, or the people at Concordia, where you're dealing with sort of these allegedly shifty personalities. But there are situations where friendships are struck up with the instructors, with the professors of creative writing programs. These friendships are struck up by ambitious students, and it's okay to be ambitious. But there's an ambiguity there. There's a bit of a gray zone, and in turn, the way the professors act is a bit of a gray zone, is a bit ambiguous. In cases where it's not just talent, but where it's charm, where it's physical attractiveness, where it's charisma, etc., the qualities of the author rather than the work, I think we really do need a discussion and really need to sort of decide whether that gives us the best literature in the end. I don't think it does. I think there's been a serious decline in quality over the past 20 years or so in the stuff that gets printed. And I think that's one of the big reasons that people don't buy as many literary novels as they used to. They don't buy as many novels, period. They don't buy as many books. Publishers need to start thinking a little bit more clearly about whether they're actually publishing stuff that general people want to read. So those are things that I think we need to talk about and hope that people will. Now, one other point that I made was about the Canadian situation specifically, and I hope that gets more discussion too. The situation in Canada is bad. It's really, really bad. And it's so bad, actually, that people don't want to talk about how bad it is. Just to riff a little bit more on the whole Galloway thing. Um, there's been a lot of discussion about it, and it's taken on a very feverish quality. If you go to Twitter, right now, people are, they're basically two groups, sort of really three main players in this. One of them is Steven Galloway, who doesn't say very much. There are sundry other professors at the UBC program who've also been let go, and there may be allegations against them. I don't know what the details are with the other people. But right now, there are two main players publicly, and one of them is the group UBC Accountable, which is headed more or less by Margaret Atwood, but also involves people like Joseph Boyden and Madeleine Taine. And then there are the writers who are against UBC Accountable, and they're led by people like Zoe Whittall and so forth. And these two groups have been fighting with each other, but they've also started fighting amongst themselves. And the problem is that there is a wall of silence that has been created by basically by Stephen Galloway's lawyers, and possibly as well by the lawyers of the University of British Columbia. People just don't know enough facts, and it may be time to ask whether it's time to just sort of let this issue go a little bit. Nobody really looks very good coming out of this. And again, in terms of what I talked about a moment ago, in terms of the quality of writing that gets published, there are big issues here that Canadian publishing need to focus on a little bit more than having these equivalents of giant-sized food fights. I used to read a lot of book reviews and go through a lot of Canadian books, American books when I lived in Canada. I don't have the opportunity to do that as much anymore, but I do try to keep up, and I go back to Canada at least once a year. I always make sure to read several books or buy several books, go to the magnificent collection at the Toronto Public Library, go to favorite secondhand bookstores, go to first-hand bookstores sometimes. And I can tell you that just from my own point of view, there has always been a quality problem with Canadian writing, and it continues. It just continues. There's too much boring work that gets published. There's too much mediocre, clumsy work that gets published. There's too much work that is sort of pretentious and fails to achieve the qualities of vitality and intelligence both. For a work to succeed, I shouldn't even call it literature. I should just talk about fiction. For a work of fiction to succeed, it should be vital and intelligent. Vitality is conspicuously lacking quality in Canadian writing. There's always been a problem with that. We've always tended to be outpaced by the Americans in particular, who, as a collectivity, are geniuses at producing vital works of fiction. And that's that's a tough act to follow. But at the same time, these problems that I identified with the creative writing programs go way, way back in Canadian publishing. There's always been a lot of favoritism. There's always been a tendency of small presses to publish work by friends and acquaintances and so forth. And it's sick. It's just wrong, and it's sick. So you end up with patently mediocre writers. I can think of at least half a dozen, but one that I would name is Leon Rook. He's published something like 28 books. He's a terrible writer. He's absolutely awful. And he has young acolytes who write the same sort of, it's supposed to be postmodern. I don't know what it is, but it's just drivel. And then there is another type of writing that is sort of the artsy-fartsy short story, which is it's just sort of nothing much happens in these stories, but they're told in this sort of artistically affected way, which is supposed to be interesting. It just makes for difficult reading. It's not pleasant to read. And then finally, there are plotless novels. To write a plotless novel is difficult. It's actually more difficult than writing one with a plot. You have to be a very good writer on a sentence-by-sentence level. There are not many writers in this country who are truly excellent at writing sentence by sentence. There are not many who are really outstanding stylists.